Okay, that's great. Myself, Swapnali, and on behalf of UBS Forums, C2FO, Enaplan, Happy, ClearTax, ICRA, Wonderland Hubs, Firmway, and Upgrad, I welcome you all for this exclusive 8th edition of Future of Finance Summit and Awards. First of all, thank you so much, all of you, for joining us today for this exclusive event. Giving a brief about the event, as CFOs and finance leaders anchor themselves in this increasingly volatile landscape, they have to play a strong and critical role in stabilizing their business currently and positioning it to thrive in this post-COVID scenario. With all this uncertainty, immediate challenges like effective data management, liquidity scantiness, process automation, distributed supply chain, and an ongoing need to protect your assets and manage cost are putting significant pressure on the finance professionals. And in order to survive in this disruption and changing times, CFO and finance leaders need to evolve into more strategic and analytical roles with data-driven decisions. And today at this event, our leaders will equip you with the best tools and strategies, helping you to increase your productivity and agility of your finance processes by harnessing data, RPA, and other technological innovations for future business growth. And with this, to set the tone for the day, I would like to invite our chairperson, that is Mr. Raj Katari, who is the Senior Director for Large Enterprise Sales at C2FO. Giving a brief introduction, he is a seasoned business professional with a career spanning of around 20 plus years working in MNCs and startups across India, United States, and Asia Pacific. He has spent around 12 plus years at Microsoft, which shaped most of his career and was instrumental in giving him diverse experiences and rich learning. Prior to Microsoft, he was CIO at Nagarjuna Fertilizers and Chemicals Limited. With this, please welcome Mr. Raj with a huge round of applause.
Yeah, it's usually the most difficult one to do an icebreaker in the first session, but it's a privilege. So I am Raj Katari. Thank you for coming out today. It's for some of us who don't live in Bangalore, it's probably one of the best weathers we get welcome to. So we've all come with a fantastic mindset and so happy smiles. And fortunately, we've beaten the traffic coming in early. So I want to talk a bit about I was looking at the lineup for the day. We've obviously got some fantastic thought leaders coming from different areas of experiences across the industry. We are also having a lot of companies being represented here in some shape and form who are large brands in their own right, not just in India, but globally, who have a lot of best practices to transformation and innovation. And there's going to be a lot of learning and sharing, which is kind of lined up for the day. So I see that great lineup, really keen and looking forward to that. I want to talk a bit about whom I represent so that we can kind of set the context. So I represent C2FO. Some of you are our customers and some of you are not. So just to kind of bring all of you up to speed with what we do. We are a 12 to 14-year-old company. We are headquartered out of the United States. We operate in about 160 countries across the world. And what we really do is, like water is important for human life, what we do is that important in terms of working capital and liquidity to the businesses. So we think of ourselves as that critical component of water for the survival of businesses. Our mission statement is, how do we help companies around the world get access to working capital and liquidity so that they have what it takes to grow, and that being the most important element for growth, right? So what exactly do we do? We're a marketplace, and we bring large suppliers and buyers onto our network. So buyers and their entire supplier network onto our network. And we help them make their accounts receivable and payment settlements in a very democratized way. In other words, there are companies who have money, there are companies who need the money, and we help them make that settlement in exchange for premiums in a very intuitive and win-win formulas. And in the process, we light up a lot of other goodness which comes with that entire ecosystem. Now, kind of to set a little bit of the scale, right? We have about 70 of the 100 Fortune 100 companies represented on our platform as customers. We have about 1.7 million plus companies in the supplier network on our platform who actively participate and get access to liquidity and working capital. And to get a sense of the scale at which we do this, I talked about how we help do payment settlements. Think of them as early payments. In a year, and specifically let's say 2022 as a year, we're going to clock about $100 billion worth of payouts for early payments. But that's coming from a universe of about $2 to $2.5 trillion worth of invoices which are on our ecosystem, on our network. Sometimes it's easy to get lost in numbers, but I want to kind of set a context, and it's an important context for us. I think there are not more than 5 or 6 countries in the whole world who have a GDP or an economy which is larger than $1 trillion or $2 trillion, right? India is one of the few entrants in the last few years. So the size of the business and global economy which is represented on our networks is very representative of that top 7 or 8 countries in the world in terms of the size at which they operate. So that kind of gives you the mind-boggling size of business that we manage on our network. Now, just to kind of sum it up from the company point of view, many of you would have read about the G20 and the B20 summit, which recently happened in Indonesia. G20 is the governance part of it, where the governments are coming to think about joint success. The B20 is nothing but the business equivalent of that G20. Think of it as the World Economic Forum or the Davos of these 20 countries. Now, they come together on the sidelines of the G20, and they generally talk about what's the policy and what's the direction and the theme for these countries, what's the economic policies, what's the kind of environment that they want to create, and why that context is important for these 20 countries to be continuing to have meaningful and purposeful growth. That's the agenda of that summit. Now, why am I bringing it here? Is this time when they've come together and they've analyzed many elements of what's important for inclusive, sustainable growth in the markets, and they've identified C2FO as one of that very critical enabler of the global value chain, and as an enabler who's propelling the entire sustainable practices. So we get called out, and the concept of what we do has been heavily discussed in that policy think tank. What does that mean in these countries? We'll see, but for us, it's a massive recognition that 12 years back being founded to being discussed as a policy think tank into the concepts of what we do is massive. So that's everything about C2FO. I want to kind of switch gears, right? Today's purpose is all about learning and sharing. There are so many elements when we think about getting future ready. It's not just about how do we get ready ourselves, how do we get our organizations ready? Is it about the business? Is it about the people? Is it about the digital stuff? Is it about transformation? You kind of think of all the soft aspects and all the functional aspects. It's a fairly complex world on what we can drive as transformation. Today, we are going to hear from a lot of speakers across the spectrum in terms of what makes sense to them. But there are 2-3 points which I personally connect with, I deeply care about, and in our interactions with a lot of CXO leaders across the country and the world when we interact, these come in as the most common themes in terms of what's on the top of their mind. I'd just like to share them as questions so that as you go through the sessions today, hopefully it will give you some sense to pivot on some of these questions and continue to ask the speakers so that we have a good dialogue. Those questions for me really are, one, whatever we are doing to drive the future and the growth, are we focused on the business outcomes? It's not about, like example, right? Digital's the latest buzzword. Going digital is fantastic. But what are you trying to do with it? What's the business outcome you want to deliver with that? And most importantly, is it sustainable? Not just sustainable in terms of going good with the social and the governance, but is it also sustainable from an economics point of view? Is it sustainable is it something I can uniquely do? Is it meaningful and purposeful? So the point I want to say is, what are your business outcomes? By whatever transformation you're trying to do, what outcomes are you going to light up? Question number one. Question number two is, irrespective of what we choose to do as individuals or as organizations, how are we thinking about developing ourselves? All of us are at different stages of our career, right? What development means for you in your career could be very different. There's a lot of functional development. There's also a lot of soft development. And very importantly, there is a mindset development. I just won't call it the growth mindset. I'll also probably call it as the mindset of leadership mindset. How do you take positions? How are you willing to try? How are you willing to accept failure? How are you willing to learn from it and continue to grow ahead? It's not just about us learning, but how do we then create an ecosystem around us for our friends and colleagues, including ourselves, to learn and grow. So I call it as the talent development and the leadership mindset development, right? The third point is, okay, we've got a fantastic team. Then do I have the environment and the leadership mindset and the framework created to allow my teams to have the culture of innovation and transformation? Do I complement teams who come and challenge the status quo and want to think about doing things differently? I mean, that's a part of that whole culture that you want to create and make sure that people have an inclusive way of doing it. The next point I want to call about is that word inclusive. You know, a lot of us talk about it, there's a lot of study out there. Is diversity just about men and women, or is diversity about perspectives? And why bringing in diversity, and more importantly, the inclusion which comes with that diversity, how does that make a big difference in the way we can generate business outcomes? Does diversity and inclusion genuinely translate into business outcomes? How? I'm not going to say the formula is same across the board, but it's a very critical question. If you are convinced about it, it becomes a very critical lever that you need to not just learn for yourself, but unlock in your environment. The last point I want to say is, why are we doing all of this, right? One is business outcomes. But if you really look at, in some ways, some people could word it like this, right? My sole reason of existence in this organization is for how what I do makes a change in my customer's life. If everything I'm doing is not resulting in being customer-centric as an organization, as a process, as a function, do I have the right thinking? Okay, I want to make this transformation. I want to make this digital change. I want to make this investment. Great. It's going to increase top line. It's going to better operational efficiency. Fantastic. But what is it unlocking at the end of the day? Am I being more customer-centric? Am I adding more value? Am I being unique in some shape and form? Am I differentiating with competition? So critical question around being customer-centric. So yeah, that's it from my side. 4 or 5 critical questions. You know, I always love having challenges and conversations with some of the senior leaders we meet. You know, we talk about business, we talk about what we can do with 𝗕2FO and partner and all of that good stuff, but usually that's small part of the conversation. The larger part is, are we learning from each other? How are we then transforming, and how are we thinking about the future? How do we collectively get ready for the future and get ahead and work with each other and help each other? So I'm going to look forward to the rest of the day to such learning, sharing, and hopefully a lot of fun. So thank you for having me here, and hopefully I didn't bore you with I'm happy never to have a presentation, but hopefully it made some sense. Thank you very much.